in terms of how you address aspects in a natal chart and how I even address a transiting planet. We're going to talk about Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And I think what I'm going to do is focus on really looking at transits. You can apply this natally, so you can take it from there. And you're going to find, you're going to see here two different columns. I'm going to start with one. And when we look at Saturn and Saturn transits, of course, all transits really want change. This is about change and evolution in our lives. This is about the growth process that we all are experiencing in our world, right? So often what we get and what we fear we get, or what people perceive that these planets are bringing to us, with Saturn, we're often dealing with things like limitations. You know, we're feeling restricted, we're feeling stuck. There can be a place of feeling contained and corralled in some way. And really what that is about is that we've come up to a limit in our lives with an area. Let's say Saturn is transiting the third house. I'm just picking stuff out of the blue so we can have an example. And let's say that the way we've been thinking about our life, the way we've been communicating in our world, the way we have been approaching intellectually, the intellectual approach we've taken to our world, now we've come up to a roadblock. We've come up to this limitation. And Saturn is calling us to do something, but we're feeling, we can run into places where we feel depressed because the way we've been communicating or the way we've been accessing information is not working. Maybe we feel like people aren't listening to us. We can't seem to get our words out right, or it seems to be a harder hurdle to overcome in order to be heard or to understand. So invariably, we can feel like we are the ones lacking. So Saturn can often show up as judgment. And in this case, the judging mind. We might find ourselves judging other people. Why aren't they picking it up as quickly? Why aren't they understanding what I'm saying? Somehow it's their problem, not mine. Or conversely, it can be a place where we are judging our own process. I feel stupid. I feel like I'm lacking. I can feel like I'm not getting this, and it takes me a lot longer in order to integrate this information. This can also be someone who has Saturn natally in the third, right? So it's a place where we often feel stuck, and the more stuck we feel, or the more we experience that sense of feeling stuck, we can sink into a place of depression. Because we often fear the unknown, and the current known world of how we've defined our reality is not working, right? So what does Saturn really want? It's calling for us to slow down. It's calling for us to have some patience. Yes, we are experiencing limits, but it's important for us to understand, wait a minute, maybe there is a real limit here that I'm trying to push beyond. Let's talk about another example. Maybe you're having Saturn transit Mars in some way. Could be Saturn conjunct Mars, square Mars, oppose Mars. It could be even Saturn transiting the ascendant. And so Mars representing physicality, our energy, the projection of our will is being limited in some way. We're being frustrated. There's a good word for often what we get, that sense of frustration. Things are not moving in the way I want them to. So we are, at times, not always, either we have to set our own limits, or limits are imposed on us. Sometimes it's a physical limitation with Saturn across the ascendant, or Saturn in hard aspect to Mars, because we are not getting the message, or we are refusing. Our ego is unwilling to slow down, unwilling to be patient, unwilling to accept limits, so limits can be imposed on us. Maybe it's in a Mars first house sort of way. Let's say you have Mars in Aries with Saturn squaring your Mars right now. And that Mars in Aries wants to rush forward and in the way it's normally used to doing things. And it's not paying attention and hasn't realized it hasn't quite reached the bottom of the steps yet and thinks it's there. And there is one more step to go. And so you come down and you twist an ankle or turn a knee. It can be a physical manifestation of that, trying to force us into slowing down to recognize our physical limits. Maybe it's Saturn in the second, requiring us to show fiscal limits or to recognize that we need to slow down in something in the way we've been doing things with our money. So yes, fiscal limits. So we're being called to patience. Maybe if we go back to that Mars and Aries example, Mars and Aries is not particularly adept at boundaries. Mars and Aries could get right up in somebody's face without recognizing where somebody else's space begins or ends. And so they need to learn about boundaries. Saturn is really calling us and wants of us to restructure something in our lives, to recognize the limits or the limitations of the old, that it is done, and that it's calling us to be wise, mature, and responsible in this process to build a new path. And so the more we try to push on into the old path that is no longer working, the more frustrated and the more, and in some cases, particularly if that Mars is in Aries with that Saturn square, that frustration turns into anger and rage and striking out. So we're being called to account for our own space. We're being called to account for our own energy. We're being called, if it's Saturn in aspect to Mercury or Saturn transiting the third, we're being called to account for our own words, to account for our own thoughts, to be more wise in the words that we choose, to be more wise in the ways that we communicate.